Hi, it's Yoni, and it's been a little bit of a time since we've done a live, so I'm really pleased that you're joining us either live as it happens today or on the replay. And as probably some of you will know, and if you're new, just to let you know that I'm Yoni, I'm a social worker, I'm also an adopter and somebody who's lived through adoption as a child. And I'm really pleased to introduce to you Lucy Smith, who will tell you a little bit more about herself.
Thank you. So, I'm Lucy, and I'm a mental health advocate, author, and podcaster after my own experiences with anxiety. So, as a child, I was really shy and lacked confidence and worried a lot. And I thought that was completely normal. I didn't really know that it was anything to do with mental health or mental illness. I didn't, anxiety, depression, those kind of words weren't talked about when I was in school.
Mm.
So I basically just struggled alone and thought that was normal and that was just what I would be like forever. Until I started getting quite severe panic attacks. And it literally wasn't until my late teens, early 20s that my panic attacks got so severe that I realised that there was something more to it and I needed to get some kind of professional help because it was making me feel like my body and my mind were out of my control, which was obviously quite a scary feeling.
Mm.
Which was when I then got diagnosed with severe anxiety and severe depression at about the age of 20.
Nice, wow. And I think I'm sure that your experience will resonate with quite a few of our foster carers and adopters, just because so many young people who go through the care system, um, for whatever reason, experience sort of mental health concerns and issues,
Mm.
and also sometimes they can be in care because parents can't manage their needs in the way that they want them and need them to be supported. So um, I don't know how much you're able to share, but I think it would be really interesting, perhaps helpful for carers to have a little bit of an insight into um, how their young person might be feeling if they're experiencing some of those issues. If you don't mind just sharing a little bit
Yeah,
more about how it impacted, I suppose, on day-to-day life.
yeah. Yeah, I'm more than happy to be really open and share lots of details. So don't worry about asking personal
Thank
questions.
you.
So when I was younger, I remember basically not understanding how I was feeling, and I would try to express it in a few different ways. So I had quite a few anger issues when I was younger, particularly in my teenage years. I threw things and hit things, and that was kind of my way of expressing how I was feeling. I couldn't find the words. Um, that was met by like punishment and shouting, which didn't help, if I'm being completely honest. I needed my parents to sit me down and ask me what was wrong and what I was feeling, and maybe together we could have got to the bottom of it. But instead, it was met um, with punishments and things. Um, I also, with regards to anxiety, which I now know was anxiety, I had a lot of physical symptoms. So I would very often feel really sick or have a
Mm.
really bad tummy ache or really bad headache. And I would tell my mum that I was poorly, but she would say that I'm well enough to go to school because I haven't actually been sick, or I'm not
Mm.
doubled over in pain, even though I felt really poorly and it felt like a physical illness. I think now looking back, that was definitely my anxiety showing up in physical symptoms.
Mm.
I was so anxious and nervous about going to school that I literally felt physically sick at the thought of having to leave the house. Um, my parents didn't know much about mental health. I think it would have been really useful if they'd have been educated and known how to support me. Like I said, when I was a child, I kind of accepted it as normal. But it would have been really nice to have some kind of education, either from school or home or anybody, telling me that those are actually mental health conditions, and this is how you can support them. This is the things that parents need to know. These are the things school needs to know. These are the things the child needs to know. That would have been really, really useful. And unfortunately, that wasn't about.
Mm.
But I think as a parent, trying to really understand that the behavior of the child normally has a feeling attached to it. So if they're throwing things, or if they're shouting or screaming or kicking or anything like that, or crying all the time, instead of trying to focus on the behavior, speak to them
Mm.
instead about how they're feeling. How are they feeling? Can they try and think of a word or draw a picture or anything to try and express how they're feeling? I think that can be really, really useful.
Mm. I think it's interesting you've said that, because I'm just thinking about so many of the young people that I work with, who, will perhaps be expected to sit down and articulate how they're feeling and what is at the bottom and the root of how they're behaving. And actually, they may not have the words. Even, teenagers may not have the words to be able to explain it. So I think that's useful to think about other ways of talking about it. And I know we've talked in the past at different times about how important it is with quite young children to give expression to their emotions. And certainly my experience was um, that you weren't really encouraged to have strong emotions,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore you learn as a child. And I'm not necessarily saying, I think this was partly adoption and partly my parents' style of parenting, or my mother's style of parenting, that actually strong emotions were not something that you expressed. They weren't talked about. You just bottled them in. And so anything that carers and parents can encourage, that talking about it and making sense of it, I think is really
Yeah.
important. What do you think, from your experience, sort of would have been helpful? I guess I'm thinking about your parents. You talked a little bit about them talking about it more, and the people around your parents. What would have been helpful?
So I think it would have been really helpful for them to just know how to support me, to know, like, almost to allow me to express those feelings in those ways, and for me to be able to feel safe doing that, and for them to say it's okay, we understand that you're feeling sad or anxious or nervous or whatever word it is that you use to describe it. I think that would have been really helpful. um Going back to what you just said about the communication and not always being able to verbalize it, I've also seen picture cards used a lot recently. I work
Okay.
in a special needs secondary school, and we use picture cards that have emotions on. So they can point to them to explain how they're feeling. Like I said earlier, obviously drawing a picture is a good way as well to express how you're feeling.
Mm,
So I think parents just really being open to that. When I was younger, I didn't have the vocabulary to explain it. Like I said, I didn't even know
mm,
about anxiety and depression until I was in my late teens.
mm,
I think we need to be learning them, parents, children, schools. We need to be talking about it from such an early age so that everybody
yeah.
understands. And then from there, you'll get the support naturally. If your parents understand, they'll naturally just know how to support you.
Mm. And it's hard not to see. Obviously, COVID has had a huge impact on the mental well-being of the whole population. And I'm certainly seeing that, and I'm sure you are, as the kids come back into school. That played out, but I think it's social media as well, perhaps as emphasised,
Mm-hmm.
um, from children and young people that I've spoken to, that you're supposed to be one way, and if you're not that way, then you're wrong, and therefore, and it's not you're doing something wrong, it's you are wrong, and therefore you're not right, you're not normal, or whatever it is. And there's some very strong messages that are really unhelpful that we're giving our children and young people, sadly, at the moment. something that I was thinking about in terms of parents helping perhaps is also recognizing that they have emotions too.
Hmm.
And that's something, that is perhaps not in the mainstream in some ways.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm actually not a parent myself, but like I said, I do work in a school, and that's actually something I do in school. So if somebody is feeling a little bit nervous, like today was all of their first day back,
Okay.
and a couple of them said to me, I was with the New Year Sevens, and a couple of them said, I'm feeling a bit nervous about my first day. And I said, so am I. This is my first day in a new class as well. And I'm feeling a little bit nervous too. And I think that's really nice for them to be able to see actually, this is normal. It's okay to feel nervous. Even the teaching assistant and the teacher feels a little bit nervous.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to show them that everybody feels emotions. It's not just a child thing,
Mm,
and that it's normal. I think that's the most important thing, really, is to allow them to think that it's normal to feel that way. I know for me personally, when I was younger, I felt like um, being shy was just me, but I didn't see anybody else being shy because to me, they all looked confident and happy. But I knew that I
mm,
wasn't confident and I wasn't happy. So I felt like I wasn't normal. And
yeah.
that's the worst thing that you can feel as a child.
Yeah, definitely. Because school is very anxiety provoking
Mhm.
anyway, isn't it? And the that sort of change from the being part of your immediate family to then having links and building relationships with your peers.
Mhm.
There's a quite natural progression that you have to go through anyway. And then if you're feeling isolated within your peer group, then it's absolutely challenging. And I certainly know my experience in secondary school where there was quite a lot of bullying, racially motivated bullying. It just gets in the way of you sort of developing your own sense of self. And for adopted and foster children, that can also be quite an issue. Um, do you think there are sort of particular things that parents can do to get more support if they're feeling like, I read quite a lot of conversations from the parents of teenagers who are feeling like their teenagers are sort of almost quite remote from them. Um,
Mhm.
do you think there's things that parents can do to sort of build that trust or relationship?
Yeah, definitely. Going back to what you said about the parents getting support, I think it's really important for parents to use the schools and the teachers as extra support. I know my school personally are really, really good at focusing on mental health, and we're very good also at supporting our parents with supporting the children as well.
Mm,
Um, so you might have a school counsellor, or mental health lead, or anyone within the school that you can talk to, or the child's tutor, get some tips from them because they'll obviously have a lot of experience in supporting children and young people with their mental health. So, support and tips from them is really good. Um, Obviously, seeking professional support as well from a counsellor through your GP. That's something that I did in the end.
yeah.
But that's something that I think parents can sort of get involved in as well, isn't it? And get some tips
Mm,
from counsellors. But yeah, I think with regards to the parents gaining the trust of the teenagers, I mean, speaking personally as someone that was a teenager that was struggling, it's not very welcomed, I think, sometimes. I
mm,
know my mum went about it in all the wrong ways. When I became withdrawn, she began to sneak in my room and get my phone and look through it while I was in the bathroom, and that
mm,
just meant that I didn't trust her at all, and that I thought she was against me rather than with me,
mm,
which I think teenagers sort of feel anyway, because that's just the way society is, isn't it? I think
mm,
teenagers generally could be quite rebellious. That's all part of growing up and learning
mm,
and making mistakes. um, I was actually quite a well behaved teenager. Generally, it was just my mental health that I struggled with, and at home I expressed that in not very nice ways. But I think sometimes it's really hard to have a face-to-face conversation with your parents, especially because sometimes it's about them. So sometimes they're the ones that are upsetting you. That was the case for me sometimes with my dad. We didn't really get on. um, I know he loved me, and I know that it was me that was thinking he didn't love me and that he actually did. But we had no way of communicating that, because every time we tried to, he wouldn't understand, and then I would get annoyed that he didn't understand.
Yeah.
So I think just being really understanding. Don't You have to validate how they're feeling, even if you don't agree. So whenever I told my dad, I feel like you don't love me, he would respond by shouting, well, I do love you. Well,
Right.
that doesn't
Yeah.
help. I feel like you don't love me. So you need to say, I
Mm.
understand that you feel that way. That's completely okay for you to feel that way. But here are lots of examples that show that I do love you. I think that would just be a bit more productive, rather than shouting, I do love you.
Absolutely. I'm just Anushka has just added a comment. So interesting, and a familiar feeling of anxiety at school. Thank you both. Yeah, absolutely. School is can be so challenging, and I think I've had conversations with adopters who are supporting their children, um, who perhaps a bit maybe different. They're also adopted, which makes you different in other ways. And there's a real sense that actually the schools are created for the average, and all of our children, for lots of different reasons, will not be average. And sadly, they're not very good. Many schools are not very good at managing children who are not average. And not are expressing themselves in ways that perhaps aren't the regulated ways of communicating. And I think it's so important to for carers to be proactive advocates for their children. But it's a challenge. I know certainly. My one of my children had some real issues towards the end of secondary school around her anxiety and not really wanting to go in. And we went in time and time and time again, and they didn't fully understand why she wasn't behaving in the way that everyone else ought to be behaving. And yet, when she came out of school, and went to a different environment, she's flourished largely. I think I said in some training, I think that if you look at the history of schools, they are very important, but they were developed in the industrial revolution sort of time to create people who could work in factories. And sometimes it feels like that's still a part to play in some schools. I mean, some schools are brilliant, and there's a lot of thought about um, um, therapy and attachment, understanding, and learning. So, what do you think that parents? I mean, I know it's quite a broad age range, but what could parents ask of schools to support them and their children?
So, like, thinking personally from the school that I work at now, we do a lot on emotional regulation and encouraging our children throughout the day to say how they're feeling. So we use what's called zones of regulation, and there's 4 different color codes. And you basically pick which one you feel. So blue is sad and tired or feeling poorly, green is feeling happy, and yellow is feeling a bit nervous or anxious. I think excited's also on there. And then red is feeling really angry and out of control. So I think things like that are really, really powerful in school, but they can be equally as powerful at home. So if schools use techniques like that, and like I said, we are a special needs secondary school, so we're a little bit different to the majority of schools, and particularly mainstream schools. But if they have strategies like that in place at school that work really, really well, there's no reason why they can't be used at home as well.
Right.
These kind of resources are available online. Obviously, you can go on, print them off, have them in your house, and allow your children to use the same strategies at home as they do at school. That will
Mm,
really help them as well, because if they're doing one thing at school and then they're doing something different at home, that can be really confusing. Same
mm,
with if they're using different words. So if at school they're saying worried, at home they're saying anxious, the children might
mm,
not connect that those words mean the same. We've got so many words for feelings and emotions that all kind of overlap and mean the same thing or slightly different. So I think
mm.
trying to use the same terminology and have an approach that is very similar, if not the same, I think can be really helpful.
Okay, thank you. Um, we've talked a lot about schools, and I'm wondering whether there's sort of a discussion to be had about a health service. I'm certainly aware of the challenges of getting some support for children and young people through the mainstream services. Is that something that you're, as an advocate, seeing play out?
Yeah, I think it's definitely improved, but I think there's definitely a lot more work to be done. I know in our town alone, our waiting list for services like CAMS and TAMS are absolutely huge.
Mm,
And there's not enough counsellors and professionals to go around. So I think, yeah, as a whole nation, really, we need to be working on that.
mm,
Obviously there's a lot of advocates out there that are trying to push the message and trying to explain that we need these services. They need to be available for children and young people, as much as they need to be aware for adults. So I think, yeah, I think it's probably an ongoing process.
mm. Um, and I was going to say, Anisha, if you've got questions for Lucy, then do put them in the chat, and I'll pass them on. Um, I'm certainly aware that that CAMS is under enormous stress at the
Mm-hmm.
moment, and I guess COVID has just exacerbated a problem that was
Mm-hmm.
already existing in terms of mental health services. And the specialist services, there's a sort of a limit to what those are available. Seems to me that the early intervention is really key where we can. And I know I often see links to different things, but I've been working with Keely Crawl, who's a play therapist, to deliver training for adopters and foster carers, encouraging sort of dedicated time to spend with children around play. And one of the things that why I bang on about it so much, I guess, is because it creates that space where the child knows on a regular basis you're going to have that conversation, a conversation which is child led. And if you could build that into your life sort of over years, then that may help in the longer term in terms of teenagers feeling like there is space for them to talk to you um, about what they want to talk about, rather than what reflecting on my life as a parent of teenage girls, is that sometimes you don't it's not very easy to make that space to give them time to talk to you about things that they want to. And it's interesting, my youngest will quite often say, I'd like, let's go for a drive. And I suppose that's sort of shorthand a little bit for let's go and have a heart to heart, or just
Mm-hmm.
spend some time together. But teenagers struggle to ask for it if it's not easily available. So in your advocacy work, what are the sort of um, the helpful strategies as an individual, sort of supporting themselves around their mental health? Because obviously there are things that we can do to sort of increase our mental health. Um,
Mm-hmm.
any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I always explain it as basically first you need to understand it really well. So for me with my anxiety, I can tell you really clearly what my triggers are, what my symptoms are, and basically I can predict when anxiety is going to start and how it's going to make me feel because I understand it so well. So I think that's a really important place to get to. That's something that parents and carers can support their children with.
Mm.
And once you've got that understanding, and even while you're figuring out the understanding part, using a range of tools to manage it. So I call it like your toolkit. So literally having, and I like to think of it as a physical list. I have mine as a physical list on my phone. So that in
Mm.
moments of anxiety or stress or depression or any other mental health or any emotion basically that you're feeling, you can open that list and you can pick a tool and you can try it. So a few tools, I'll just go through a few briefly. I'm happy to explain
Mm.
any in more detail if you want me to. So things like
Okay, thank you.
mindfulness or journaling, gratitude, exercise, talking to people, obviously is really, really important. Those are
Mm.
probably my top five. I also use distraction, but I use it wisely because I don't think it's good to distract and not come back. I think you can distract if the symptoms
Right.
are very severe to help you calm those symptoms with something
Mm.
like a movie or comedy or music or a puzzle or anything fun that you enjoy and that calms you down. But
Mm.
I don't think it's good to distract and then forget. I think you should always go back and think about that emotion, why it came up, how it made you feel, so that you can learn on it for next time.
Okay. And I'm thinking, you know, people who listen to some of these will think, "Oh no, she's banging on about Brené Brown again." But she talked about, yeah, and I can't remember which book, but she talks about her two children and her husband. Every evening, they'd have a meal together, and they'd all say something that they were grateful for from that day, and it might be just a little thing, or it might be, a really big thing. But I'm thinking, that is such a good sort of healthy way of encouraging children to be grateful and to remember some context, because I think it's so easy to sort of get into a downward spiral, isn't it, of all the things that are negative, and actually we forget perhaps what
Mm-hmm.
all the things that we've achieved or are happy
Yeah.
about.
There's also been a lot of studies that show that when you focus on gratitude, it's really hard to feel any other emotion at the same time. So, by focusing on
Okay.
that gratitude, it actually has been shown to reduce feelings of anxiety or sadness or any other feelings and emotions that you might be feeling at the same time.
Wow, that's
Mm.
interesting. And I think it's the journaling as well. Sort of coming to understand the power of processing the day through writing it down. It's something that I've been doing a little bit inconsistently, if I'm honest, but a work in progress. Are there sort of tools that you'd recommend that people can go and look for, or can they connect with you for more information?
Yeah, so I actually have a range of workbooks and journals. One of them is a gratitude journal for children, and another one is a feelings journal. So I do have a couple available already. The plan in the future is to have a big range that can support children and families, including a communication log, which I think will be a really interesting one. Where the child can write a note about how they're feeling or something that's upset them, and then the parent can reply, so they don't have
Mm.
to have that face to face difficult discussion. They can just
Mm.
write it in their own time, put it somewhere, the parent or carer can pick it up, reply, put it back, and then that can continue. So I thought that was quite a good idea. That's something I did with my parents when I was younger, because I found it very hard. Like I said, my dad would respond with shouting. I didn't want that. So in the end, I would
Mm.
write notes. At the start, he screwed them up and chucked them, but by the end, he was reading them and replying.
And yeah, I think sometimes it's much easier to write something down, isn't it? You can sort
Yeah.
of order your thoughts, and I know perhaps not such a great example, but when I um, first came out to my parents, I wrote a letter that was to somebody else, which they found, and I suppose I knew that she would find it because she went through my room, but it was a way of starting the conversation. Maybe not the most tactful way in the way that I wrote it, but it served a purpose. And yeah, sometimes it's, I guess you don't always have to even pass on the note, because it does focus your mind, and then you can express it in whatever way is best. And a lot of our young people now are very much about the written word, aren't they, in terms of blogs and texts, and writing down how they're feeling. So, I if people want to find out a bit more about your work, how would they find that? And are there ways that they can link with you? If
Yeah,
you,
definitely. So my website is lucyjsmith.com.
right,
I'll put the link in the comments as well after, if I can. I'm
okay,
sure I'll be able to get in the group and
yeah,
comment.
that would be
So
great.
yeah, everything's available on there. I have a podcast which I discuss. It's called Stand Up to Anxiety. So I discuss mainly anxiety, um, and it generally is about adults, but it can all be used as children as well. I've actually got an episode in a couple of weeks specifically for children, but everything I talk about can be used for children of any age and with any adult, as long as the support is there. If it's a child, obviously, if they're just getting started with mindfulness or anything like that, they're going to need a little bit of support. Like you said, obviously having a time when you sit down for dinner to talk about gratitude, trying to make it a family occasion, I think
Mm,
is really useful. I think that's actually a really nice idea. I might start doing that with my boyfriend when we sit down for dinner.
yeah, I
I'm
think
like,
it is.
it's even things like one good thing about your day.
Mm,
My partner is very good at picking up my energy. So if I end up coming home from work and I rant for 10 minutes, he'll stop me and he'll say, "Do you realise you've just ranted for 10 minutes?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah." He's like, "Tell me one good thing about your day," and I do, and then I feel so much better. So I
mm,
mean, he's absolutely amazing. He's so good at helping me with my mental health, and my panic attacks and my night terrors. And bless him, he's been through the lot,
oh,
which is amazing. But I think as parents, you can do something very similar. If your child or young person is talking a lot about things that are negative about their day or things that are negative about themselves, just ask them to talk to you about one positive from their day or one positive thing about themselves or their
mm,
body or whatever it is they're being negative about, and try and change their perspective a little bit. It's not going to happen overnight. I know I've had body confidence issues and all sorts in the past, and you don't just go from hating your body to loving your body in a day. But little
mm.
steps like that can really help. So just ask them one positive thing.
Oh, that's brilliant. It's been so nice to talk to you, Lucy. Thank you. And do put the link so people can find out a bit more, and of the books, the PDFs that you've got. And if you want to let us know when you do the podcast around children, that I'm sure people would be really interested to hear that. So thank you. All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you. And while people are watching, just to let you know that next week we've got the Playful Parent Challenge that we're doing with Keely, the 6th to the 10th of September. So I think in the group it's been posted. If people you're interested in joining us, we would love to have you there. And also I'm doing 2 courses on anti-racist adoption, around tools and ideas about using some really concrete ideas to increase your child's understanding about race and also your confidence in terms of caring for a child, be they transracially placed or not. And those dates for the UK, 16th of September and 17th of September. 16th is at 10 a.m., 17th is at 2 o'clock, or Eastern Standard Time is the 16th is 2 o'clock, or the 17th is 6 a.m. because we do have some international folk, but that might be a little bit early for you. All right, so I hope to see you there. And thanks again, Lucy. It's been a really interesting conversation. Thank you.